China, to us Americans, Chinatown, Chinese food, we love that community in our country. But the Chinese Communist Party has one goal on their agenda on a 50 and 100-year plan. That's the complete and utter decimation of America and America's superiority and power in the world. And to break down why they were complicit in this global pandemic, I'm joined right now by my buddy Michael Johns. He's a policy analyst, he's a writer, former speechwriter for President George H.W. Bush, one of the co-founders of the Tea Party movement. And Mike, there's this woman out there who is a Chinese virologist who's saying categorically she has the science to show that it's a man-made mutation of the virus. And whether they man-made it or not, they knew about it and they had no problem letting it get to our shores because there were a lot of things going on with the trade wars, with the tariffs. They were committed to not devaluing their money anymore, and then all of a sudden, voila, we're shut down. So to me, it was a global deflationary move to keep them even with the rest of the world when they're going through some serious problems.
If you were trying this in a sort of court of law, you'd start with the question of motive, as you correctly point out. You would say, is the motive there for them to have undermined the United States economy and the president that is standing up to the Chinese Communist Party stronger than any president in our lifetimes? Clearly the motive's there. And then when you go through and look systematically at what did and did not happen in Wuhan by the Chinese Communist Party, there are all the suggestions that this regime consciously did let the virus out. Number one, they restricted the domestic airfare out of Wuhan. You could not, for instance, fly from Wuhan to, say, Beijing, while they simultaneously allowed people to leave the country. So the same protections that were given China, probably appropriately at that point, were not afforded the rest of the country. This is not, by the way, whatever we may think of the CCP and the regime in China, they're incredibly bright people. They know what they're doing. And that's certainly suggestive of malevolence. Then you go through and you say, well, how did they handle the samples of the virus? They ordered that they all be destroyed. How did they respond to the request by the US CDC and the World Health Organization enter Wuhan to look and examine the virus samples in the hopes of understanding it better and maybe developing testing kits earlier? They denied entrance to both organizations. And in the case of the World Health Organization, they did that in violation of their membership in that organization. What did they do to the individuals who observed and tried to warn the world about this pandemic in China? Those individuals, for the most part, disappeared or are still being detained and have not been heard from since. And then you look at the laboratories that began to do some testing on the genome sequence and ask, what did they do with that information? Did they make it transparently available to the rest of the world? No, they shut all those labs down and ordered those people to be silenced. And it goes on from there. And
yep.
You can look at the exportation of their PPE into Europe, for instance, was flawed to the tune of 80 and 90%. So that's not like a whoops, we made a mistake era. That's systematically flawed equipment that they sent. And they clearly have continued to not be transparent. Well, simultaneously, we're always on defense on these issues, it feels like, simultaneously blaming the United States for it. I was on Chinese state-controlled television as recently as the end of August and could not get any CCP spokesperson to acknowledge even that this virus originated in China.
Right.
Which is an incredible revelation. And by the way, it's an ironic one because simultaneously they are bragging to the rest of the world, trying to project themselves as experts in the methodologies on containing this virus.
No doubt.
Which I find somewhat confusing when you have when you can't acknowledge or identify the location of its origin.
It's pretty scary. And Peter Navarro, back a couple months ago, said that they have intelligence that China, at the same time, was working around the globe to corner the PPE market, gloves, masks, surgical gowns, and that type of stuff. So to me, this was an orchestrated plan. They, like you said, they got the brightest minds in the world over there. They're trying to deface us and discredit us and depower us every way they can. And you know, I think there's going to be a day of reckoning. Unfortunately, Mike, I think they didn't just unleash it on us. When they agreed to when they agreed with the tariff, when they agreed to the tariff deal, they realized that Trump was leveling the playing field, trading with us. Okay, but they also agreed not to devalue their currency anymore. And then that would put us in a power position to trade with the rest of the world. And they needed a deflationary move to slow down the whole world. So, you know, instead of like, you know, fixing your own problem, they just said, well, we can't fix this right now because this Trump's a maniac. What we'll do is we'll plague the whole planet and bring everybody down to us. It's like the opposite of a high tide lifts all boats. It's the other way. We're all sinking because they want to stay level with us.
And it's important because, I mean, we're a few weeks away here from obviously making a very critical decision about the future of our country. And I really feel in the public domain and the discussion, even though it did come up in the vice presidential debate the other night, Harris didn't answer the question. We're starting to see a China that is executing on a plan that we already know exists of surpassing the U.S. in trying to surpass the U.S. in every respect, as the economic leader, as a political leader, as a cultural leader. Xi Jinping is an immensely aggressive head of state, now been made president for life. We also have been just incredibly misled by the so-called purported experts on China over the last few decades who assured us that as the economy of China grew, and it's now the second largest in the world behind only us, that they would become more respectful of human rights, more integrated with the rest of the world, more inclined to act as a responsible citizen. And the exact opposite has occurred, John, with them, their human rights conditions really being as brutal at any point really since Mao Zedong's.
No doubt about it. They're colonizing the South China Sea.
Right.
They're building.
A wake-up call to environmentalists. If you are at all concerned about the environment, the direction of your rage should not be to the United States, which has been reducing its carbon emissions, but toward China, which has twice the size of the United States
right.
carbon emissions and is the world's largest polluter, and is now, as you correctly said about the South China Sea, tearing up the coral reefs of that region, 100 square miles, according to a University of Miami biologist, maritime scientist this week, that's been torn up by their illegal creation of military sites throughout that entire region.
No doubt. Mike, and we got about a minute and a half here. If you could, give us a little Schoolhouse Rock, Cliff Notes version. A lot of talk about whether the Democrats would pack the court. You can't get a straight answer out of Biden. You can't get a straight answer out of Kamala. What's the actual logistics on how easily or not easily they can make that happen if they want?
Well, there's sort of the politics of it and then the legal dimension of it. The politics is when you have Biden not answering the question, my guidance is fear the worst. Yes, he would pack the court. And then from a legal standpoint, the SCOTUS, the Supreme Court of the United States, was expanded to 9 members back in the 1800s. And by matter of sort of ritual and respect for that functionality, it stayed at that level. But there's really technically no constitutional constraint on the ability to potentially lower the number or increase the number. And the fear of conservatives, of course, is that a Democrat president, especially with so many of these cases being heard in the highest court in the land, would just stack it with liberal Democrats who are revisionist in their view of the Constitution.
So can a president do that by executive order? Do you need the House and the Senate? How does it happen?
Yeah, I mean, it's really intriguing because I think you have to go back to the 1800s and look at the change of that court there. But, you know, technically you're guided by a constitutional structure that only defines the existence of the court, doesn't define the parameters. And so, you know, those issues would probably be immensely contentious from the standpoint of the balance of powers and how it would be done procedurally. But what I have not seen, I'd like to see an argument if it does exist for this, is what might exist from a legal standpoint toward constraining a president's ability to do that, which would be immensely devastating at this point. Part of the problem is that we've
Right.
got a court now that is activist, and it historically would only hear the most contentious issues.
Right,
And
Mike.
now-
Right, we got to leave it there. I think it's safe to say that it would be so contentious that the decision to pack the court may wind up before the Supreme Court, who will have a 6-3 majority in. So we may be safe with this appointment from packing the court.
Yeah, well, that's hopeful. I mean, the president has the authority to make this appointment. It's unbelievable that we're even having any debate over that.
Right.
No reason there shouldn't be a speedy confirmation.
All right. That's Michael Johns. Mike, have a great weekend. Thank you for your sage guidance and opinions. Thanks, as always. I'll talk to you soon, brother.
Got it.